USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Game of the Week podcast from US College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. An in-depth look at this week's top college hockey matchup and a preview of the other big games.
Welcome to the USCHO Game of the Week podcast being recorded Thursday, November 7th. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. And Jim, our Game of the Week has Minnesota Duluth for a pair at Denver.
Joining us now to talk about the Game of the Week, Minnesota Duluth's beat writer for the Duluth News Tribune. You can also find him on the Rink Live. They are kind of all like the USCHO of the frozen tundra, if you will. It's Matt Wellens. And Matt, welcome into the show. Welcome back. We usually see you at Frozen Fours, but mid-season this works as well.
Yeah, well, it's kind of fitting that we're doing a rare early season because Denver and UMD this early, we usually don't see that. So it's an interesting way for NCHC play to start for both these teams, isn't it?
It really is. And, you know, obviously they'll play again later in the season, but it does feel like these two teams play a lot later, almost designed because they have been near the top of the league. You want some of the better matchups in the second half, but you're going to get to see probably these two teams play each other when maybe they're not as fresh, and then when maybe they are, you know, as seasoned as they can be. To this point in the season, Duluth, they have been, I don't want to call them a hit or miss team because I think they've played a difficult schedule, but they have not maybe had the consistency that their coach, Scott Sandlin, wants. What are your early thoughts on this team?
I think, you know, as much in the off season and the preseason here, we talked about how similar this team was. And they are in goal with Hunter Shepard and on the back end with 5 of their 6 defensemen back, but up front, they're still feeling things out up there. And, you know, they struggled offensively in their first 4 games of the season. Jimmy, you saw it, you know, when Lowell was in Duluth. And then, man, against Wisconsin, the Bulldogs really struggled with the Badgers' speed and going on the road there. You know, just, what was it, 7 goals there in the first 4 games. They weren't getting a lot of offensive production from anyone up front. Scott Perenovich was Scott Perenovich. He was great, even though he kind of tweaked his back a little bit against Wisconsin. He looked fine. He was once again Scott Perenovich against the Gophers in the sweep there. But, you know, they're still feeling things out up front, and they've had some injuries at forward that haven't helped them either. Tanner Latteru went down against Wisconsin. Quinn Olson wasn't in that series. It was interesting to see the depth that we've, you know, seen from UMD in the last 2 title runs here. And then going back to even when they played Denver, when they lost to Denver for the national championship, depth at forward has been strong for them. They've been able to roll 4 lines. They weren't able to do that, I feel, in those first 4 games. They were kind of a 2-line team, but Tanner Latteru is going to be back this weekend against Denver. Quinn Olson, man, just getting him back, a freshman out of Calgary, Alberta, played for Okotoks in the AHL last year. I just like to say Okotoks. That's why I always like to throw that in there for Quinn. He's a Boston Bruins draft pick. He's a fun kid to watch, and he adds some depth right away back in the lineup. Jimmy, I think you saw him in that Friday game against Lowell. So it'll be interesting to see how the Bulldogs match up with Denver this weekend, because the Pioneers we didn't see this last year. They're scoring a lot, and I'm still not sure UMD can be a high scoring team and put up, you know, 4 or 5 goals a night.
That is a big part of it, is finding a way to score. And you know, I guess you never really want a defenseman leading your team in scoring. And with Perenovich, he is just such a phenomenal player. But the one thing I notice about him, and I'd like your take on it, is having watched him develop from the player he was as a freshman to a sophomore, now as a junior, he feels like he understands both ends of the ice better. He's always seemed to have a little bit of offensive flair, but he seemed to be a 200-foot defenseman to the T the weekend I saw him out there to open the season. Is that an accurate assessment of his improvement this season?
Oh, yeah, I think so. And I think what helped him get to that point was being injured for the end of last season. He had a back injury that was holding him back. It prompted a lot of the questions of what's wrong with Scott Perunovich, what's going on there, and I think he was trying to, as best he could, conceal that back injury. Didn't want people to know what was going on until I believe this summer, finally, someone in the St. Louis Blues organization actually let that one out of the bag that he had been dealing with a back injury. That was the specifics of the injury. But I think that, that forced him to rethink his style of play. He wasn't able to be that speed demon, weaving in and out of forwards and defensemen and driving to the net and being the offensive defenseman that he was. It forced him to kind of sit back and be a defensive player. Talking to Scott Sandlin, I asked him that in the preseason. Did that injury make him a better player? And he said, Perunovich didn't think so, but I did. And I think we're definitely seeing it now, Jimmy. He is a really solid, 200-foot defenseman, still just as dangerous, though, offensively. Maybe even more dangerous offensively because he's got a little more patience and knows what he sees out there more. He's not taking as many of the crazy risks that we saw the freshman year. As fun as it was to watch, Scott try and weave through, 5 opposing players. He's a little better than that now. The problem, UMD's still developing the weapons up front because grading Perunovich, I've not been one to, go totally on how many goals he's scoring. It's the assists that really matter because he can score goals, but he's definitely a better playmaker than goal scorer.
Let's talk goaltending. Hunter Shepard, the senior goaltender for Duluth. If people just look at the overall statistics so far this season, they're going to say, what's happened to Hunter Shepard? But outside of that one game at Wisconsin with 6 goals against, it seems like he's been doing pretty well. How is he looking so far?
Shep's been pretty good. I mean, there's a few goals he's been hard on himself for. Wisconsin really lit the Bulldogs up there that 6-goal night. They were really able to. They found the holes in the Bulldogs' coverage, and defensively, those 5 defensemen I think that are back have been playing well. Nick Wolf, Scott Perunovich, Dylan Sandberg, Louis Rail, Matt Anderson. Up front again, that group of forwards I don't think were very good defensively either. And that led to, a lot of odd man breaks, a lot of odd man rushes. And part of that is just the Badgers are able to do that to you. They can create those chances. And we saw a little bit, Lowell did a little bit of it, I thought, too, in the opening weekend, and the Gophers kind of as well. That group, Shepard always says he's only as good as the guys in front of him. He's as modest of a goalie as you're ever going to find out there. And I, maybe the last few weeks, these first few weeks of this season have proved it. When he doesn't have strong defensive presence at forward, think of Parker Mackay and Carson Kuhlman. Yeah, those guys, the previous captains scored, big clutch goals, but they were also really, really strong forwards defensively as well. And I don't know if UMD has, Justin Richards is a good, 200-foot player. Jackson Cates can be that, but there's some other guys that probably up front need to step up their play, defensively as well as scoring wise.
Meanwhile, the opponent this weekend, Denver, freshman phenom Magnus Krona, 7 games, 2 shutouts, off to a pretty good start. What kind of things are you hearing about him and generally overall about Minnesota Duluth's opponent, Denver, this weekend?
Yeah, I think, one person brought up that, Magnus, he's a big goalie, and he's playing like a big goalie. He's using his entire body to not, there's not a lot of room to shoot against him. He does a really good job protecting that net. That he's been a really, really solid pickup for Denver. And the other guy they got too, his name escapes me right now. He also picked up a shutout in his one appearance. So that was a big question mark we all had for Denver going into this season, right? Was there, another year of losing goaltending. what was that going to be? You're just never sure sometimes, especially when a freshman comes in, whether they can handle the college level. And Denver's got it right now. And then, man, out of the blue, we're seeing a team that can score. They're averaging 4+ goals a game right now. So, Scott Sandelin said in his weekly press conference today on Wednesday that, hands down, he said they are the best team in the country right now. No question. They are number one. And he even said, that he thought they were his pick to win the NCHC at the start of the year. He thought they were the favorites, not them. Maybe hindsight, I guess, bringing it up now than earlier is a little different. But Denver's been really solid. This is going to be a tough test. We've seen this series open up a little bit. What was the joke always was, 2-1, but you didn't know who was going to have 2 and who was going to have 1 in these games. But the series has opened up a little bit. The Bulldogs won 3-0 in the NCHC semifinals last year. They had a 5-2 win in Duluth last year, but I wouldn't be shocked, especially on Friday, if we go back to the 1-goal games of old between Denver and UMD as they try and feel each other out.
Obviously, Duluth 2 national championships in a row, but one thing you can find about both of those teams, neither one of them started gangbusters, and here we are again 3-3. I don't want to say that that's a blueprint for any team. Nobody wants to come out and maybe not meet expectations early. But I also remember legendary BU coach Jack Parker saying, "My team doesn't play well till February because I screw them up for 4 months." Is this a case that this is always a team, and maybe a Scott Sandelin approach, that the team doesn't always have to start great, but it always tries to finish great?
Yeah, I mean, that was, the first team to win the national title was definitely that. A couple of years ago, last year, I thought UMD started out pretty good with, looking back now, sweeps of Michigan Tech and Maine and Notre Dame and Colorado College. They had that rough opening weekend against Minnesota, though. One thing Scott Sandelin does is he does tweak those forward lines. Heck, in the exhibition, he was tweaking the defensive pairings. He kind of experiments a little bit at times. He broke up Nick Wolf and Scott Perenovich for the exhibition and then went immediately back to them again once the regular season started. He does this sometimes in the first half. He mixes and matches the forward lines. And I don't always agree with him when he does that. I'm very much, again, I'm a hockey writer, so what do I think? Scott's the 3-time national championship coach. So, but he tinkers a little bit instead of just going with what works. And, last year you thought they had a decent lineup in the first half, and then he mixed it up at the start of the second. And that's what they ran with and went on that great run there. So I think this year especially, he has no choice but to tinker with these forwards to try and figure out, who works with who. And yeah, the Cates brothers are Jackson and Noah are phenomenal together, but maybe there is something, maybe putting Noah Cates with Justin Richards and Nick Swaney opens things up a little more. So I think you're going to probably see tweaked lines again. I think they want to get Quinn Olson. He was playing 3rd, 4th line against the Gophers. I think they'd like to get him into one of the top 2 lines there. I think they're hoping Kobe Roth and Cole Koepke can step up and be top 6 forwards after playing more of that bottom 6 role before. So I think some of that is where we see these offensive struggles early from UMD. It probably goes back to Jack Parker's. Maybe you just can't resist tweaking and seeing, wondering what works and what doesn't. So once they get the right combinations figured out, I think that's when you'll see the Bulldogs offense start clicking a little more. They're not going to average 4 goals a game, but maybe they can get to 2 or 3.
Well, it should be a great weekend of hockey. Minnesota Duluth will host the nation's number 1 team, Denver, both Friday and Saturday night at Amsoil Arena in Duluth, Minnesota. And Matt Wellens from the Duluth News Tribune. We always appreciate you stopping by. Hopefully we get to put you back on the air at the Frozen Four, because you have been pretty much a mainstay there. So it would be nice to have you back for the 4th year in a row.
Yeah, fourth year in a row would be pretty incredible. And as an old CCHA reporter, it wouldn't be bad to be back in the old home of the Super Six as well.
That's Matt Wellens of the Duluth News Tribune and the Rink Live, and we'll be back with more of the Game of the Week podcast in a moment.
This is the USCHO Game of the Week podcast from US College Hockey Online.
Jim, let's take a look at some of the games going on around college hockey this weekend, starting out with the Game of the Week. Minnesota Duluth at Denver.
Yeah, it's certainly a really nice home test for Duluth. That'll be a good atmosphere, I would hope, inside Amsoil Arena. In Denver, when you have the coach you're playing acknowledging the fact that they're the best team in the country, as Matt Wellens pointed out. I mean, Denver is strong, and Denver has performed very well to this point. Every end of their team seems to be clicking, whether it's the goaltending. I love Stapley up front. He's a playmaker. He's a finisher. I just think that this is a very good Denver team. So you're looking at Duluth. They're trying to kind of gain some momentum in the season. And obviously, they're coming off a bye week, but 2 wins against Minnesota before that. You feel like you had a little momentum, then it had to go on to pause. You want to be able to pick up where you left off. This is a tough opponent. I think these are 2 really good hockey games that have great potential. I don't know if, as Matt said, that they're going to be 2-1 games like they always were, but you certainly have the potential for some pretty low-scoring hockey games here.
In the Big Ten, the big matchup is a pair of games. Ohio State ranked at number 9 this week, at number 5, Notre Dame.
Yeah, both these teams are playing well out of the gate. And Notre Dame, obviously, last weekend, they only took 4 of 6 points in their conference. They lost a 3-on-3 overtime against Minnesota on the road on Friday night, but they bounced back nicely, fell behind, and found a way to win on Saturday. I like everything about the way Notre Dame is playing right now. In Ohio State, there's not a lot of flaws in their game as well. And they get going. These are probably the top 2, technically on paper, top 2 teams in the Big Ten right now. You might have to throw Penn State in there. I think that trio will be right there at the end, fighting it out for the league title. But I think this is such an early season matchup. This is kind of heavyweight hockey going against one another this weekend.
Home and home in Hockey East as number 11 Providence taking on unranked BU. Boston University needs to turn things around.
In both of these programs, for that matter, Providence, I don't think you have to hit a panic button because it was really just last weekend that they didn't have the success that they wanted. But they're now winless in 3, and they're trying to find their way. Boston University, listen, this is kind of the same story we've seen now for a number of years, that they get some great recruits, they're building a nice team, but the execution doesn't end up being there. And that's something that no matter who it is, whether it's Albie O'Connell or their captains or their players or their fans, that you got to have concern for that. And I think they're good. They've got enough players. They've got enough talent to be excellent. It's just making sure that talent all works hard to become the team that they have potential to be.
Also in Hockey East, Maine is in for a pair at number 14 Lowell. Maine off to a pretty good start.
After their first weekend, when they played in week 0, that first start weekend, and got crushed by Providence 7-0. Then they went and played an exhibition game, lost that 5-0. And I'm saying, boy, here we go again with Maine, just not a good team. But they've really responded well. Just 1 loss since then. They've played teams tough. They've found ways to win. The question is how they'll play on the road. They've never been the greatest road team under Red Gendron, and that is one of the things. They're going to go down to Lowell for both games. I mean, last week at home, they were excellent against Boston University, getting 3 or 4 points, could have easily been 4 or 4. I think that is that one thing you have to kind of worry about, is just being a road team, and that, it's a mentality. It's understanding how to play on the road. It's having the confidence to play on the road. So this will be a nice test for them. Lowell, they're off to a nice start themselves. They've had some slips along the way, but for the most part, this is a team. They've got Tyler Wall playing well in net. There should be a lot of confidence for the Riverhawks.
When we turn to ECAC, Harvard has a pair of home games with a travel partner schedule. In ECAC, you have different teams each night. So number 18, Harvard, hosting Princeton on Friday. Number 15, Quinnipiac on Saturday. Quinnipiac licking its wounds after being swept at Arizona State, and Princeton having a good weekend at St. Cloud.
Yeah, it's interesting here. You've got a lot of these teams that they start so late. Harvard, Princeton, both part of the Ivy League, and they're just in week number 2. Quinnipiac, they've been going at it a little bit longer, and as you mentioned, not the greatest weekend out at Arizona State. Princeton, they have to feel really good about themselves. Scored a lot of goals out at St. Cloud State. Maybe didn't have the defense that they wanted, because I think if they just got, limited some of the St. Cloud offense, easier said than done. They pull away with 2 wins out of that series, but they got 3 out of 4 points. That's pretty impressive. Harvard, they have high expectations, and they should. They've been a good team for the last few years, and to know that they are going to host both of these games, that probably feels, a little bit, gives them a little bit of an advantage, but they're not going to have 2 easy games here. Princeton's going to know that they're coming in playing well. Quinnipiac, they're obviously going to play at Dartmouth on Friday, but they're still going to come into Harvard on Saturday. They know that those Harvard games are always kind of some of the big tests that they face in their season. So I think that's one to watch. It should be some pretty good hockey.
In Atlantic hockey, RIT, which is off to its best start at the Division I level at 6-1-1, takes on an 0-6 Niagara in a home-and-home series. Niagara played Minnesota tough in the first weekend of the season, came home and got swept at home by league foe Sacred Heart, and then really got stomped on a bit by Denver last weekend. They're going to be hungry for a win out of the weekend, but one of the things that stands out to me is 2 players that are going to be depended on to score. Last year's Rookie of the Year in the conference, Ludwig Stenlund, and also senior defenseman Noah Delmas. Neither of them has a goal yet in those first 6 games.
I look at Niagara, and they've always been a team that exceeds expectations, and I think that this year, if they've taken a quick step back early, I just don't think that that's going to be the way that this season goes. I know Jason Lammers really well, having worked with him for a long time, and he knows how to get a team going. And I don't think they had an easy schedule to start here. That's part of it. They had a pretty difficult non-league schedule to get going, and they're going to have to find a way to get it right. And RIT, that's probably not the first opponent they want to see on their schedule, knowing how well that they're playing right now. But, I also think of Niagara, and I think of Jason Lammers as a coach that finds way to win games that people don't think are winnable. And that's something that he's done for most of his coaching career. His team has done as well. So I'm interested to see what the outcomes of that one that is. Does home ice play a factor in that series at all? Who knows? But I think that, RIT has to be careful. They can't sleep on this weekend, or they'll get run over by a Niagara team that's going to be really hungry.
Finally, a non-conference matchup between ranked teams, number 12 Wisconsin in for a pair at Omaha.
Boy, Wisconsin needs to get things right now. Omaha, I love everything that they've done. They only got 3 out of 4 up in Alaska Anchorage last weekend, but we know that they're pretty good. Wisconsin, they've got to find a way right now, because they have the ability, they have the talent. They're kind of similar to what we talk about at Boston University. They maybe have looked better to this point in the year, but they've got to win games. You can have all the talent in the world, but they got shellacked by Penn State last week, and they've got to find a way to bounce back off that. You can't be giving up 10 goals in a weekend and only scoring 3. That's not a good formula. This is a team that scored 11 goals at Merrimack just less than a month ago. They have the ability. They've got to find a way to put the puck in the net.
Well, that'll do it for this week's edition of the Game of the Week podcast. After the weekend, you can check out the Weekend Review podcast. We'll see what happened. And also don't miss USCHO Spotlight. Earlier this week, we talked to NCHC Commissioner Josh Fenton. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Game of the Week podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.